Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Charles Overby, chairman of the Overby Center for Southern Politics and Journalism. I'm delighted to welcome you here this evening. This is the second night in a row we've had a program. First time that's ever happened, and it's so good to see everybody here tonight. Of all the programs that we have had this year, this one means the most to me. It's dear to my heart because I wouldn't be standing at this podium tonight if it weren't for high school journalism. And high school journalism changed my life. And Andrea and I were prepared to talk about that tomorrow. Andrea was editor of her high school paper, as I was, my wife sitting here. And we're going to defer that because of the weather to another time to talk about. But we're not here to talk about Andrew and me tonight. We're here to talk about the 75th anniversary of the Mississippi Scholastic Press Association and the directors. We have 4 of the directors here tonight to share their insights, not just into high school journalism, but to journalism in general. And these are all wise people. And I'm looking forward to their insights on a variety of topics. And then you'll have an opportunity to ask them questions as well. So I'm going to turn the program over to the newest fellow at the Overby Center, R.J. Morgan. R.J. is an assistant or associate, I'll never know the difference, professor of journalism at here at the Ole Miss School of Journalism. And he just recently joined the Overby Center as a fellow and has brought great enthusiasm to the center, and he's working with me closely on a variety of issues. He's been a teacher, a high school teacher, before he came to Ole Miss, and he was always very popular with his students. He was recognized as Teacher of the Year a number of times. He's popular with the students here, although I know a lot of you students are here because he made you come. That's okay. So we're glad that you all could come to hear our panel tonight. RJ, thank you for organizing this, and thank you for your leadership that's going on right now with high school journalism. I'm going to turn the program over to you. Thank you for coming.
So much, Charles, and thank everybody for being here. I'll echo the same thing Charles just said, in that high school journalism is the only reason that I'm here. I grew up in Pearl, Mississippi. Is anybody here from Pearl? I didn't think there would be, this being a college campus and all. Most people from Pearl, not college folks, but I'm kidding. No, so I was a high school newspaper editor at Pearl High School, and was really not a very good student. My students in the crowd, I wish they would close their ears for this part, but I was not a very good student at all. The only thing I really cared about in high school were sports, girls, and the school newspaper. In my classes, I really didn't want to read Shakespeare, I didn't want to read Chaucer, I didn't really care anything about that, and I didn't really care anything about writing a paper that only my English teacher was going to read about any of those books. But when I started working for the school newspaper, then I realized that they were going to run off 1,000 copies of my homework and distribute it to all of my friends and to all of those girls that I was interested in, and so I might ought to take it seriously. And so working on my school newspaper taught me how to be a better student in a lot of other areas, and it taught me how to organize my thoughts. It taught me how to write. It taught me how to talk to people. It taught me how to pay attention to details as well as the big picture. And I was editor of my high school newspaper for 3 years, and then went into college newspaper and on and on. But I wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't have nearly the work ethic that I developed without my high school newspaper. And so it has been a joy of my career, both as a high school teacher and now as MSPA director, to try to create those experiences and spaces for other students where they can learn and grow through scholastic journalism in the same way that I did. And so that's become my mission and my life's work. And so I've been at MSPA now since 2013. And this organization means a lot to me. And it has a very rich history, as you'll see from the other people on the stage. So I want to introduce the rest of our panel. We've got to your far left, Charlie Mitchell, who's currently a professor in the school. He was MSPA director back in the 80s, 1984 and 1985. Then you have Miss Robin Street, who has long been a pre-R professor in the University of Mississippi School of Journalism, but who has recently retired. Congratulations, Robin. And she was MSPA director from 1990 through 2004. And then to her left, you have Miss Beth Fitz, who was the Oxford High School, longtime Oxford High School journalism advisor, highly decorated high school journalism advisor in her own right. And she was the director of MSPA from 2005 to 2013. So these are most of the last 30 plus years of MSPA directors we have on the stage with us tonight. And so I want to talk a little bit with you guys about just MSPA and the value of high school journalism and how we all kind of came to this organization. So let's start there. If you guys wouldn't mind, we'll start with Charlie and work our way around. But tell me how you came to be involved with MSPA and what kind of your experiences were with the organization, what the organization was like during your tenure, and we'll carry on a conversation from there.
Well, it was a simpler time. We didn't have all these computers and iPhones or anything like that to deal with. I was trying to remember, we put out a weekly or bi-weekly newsletter that we mailed to every high school publication in the state. And I think that because we could get bulk rate postage, it cost us $4 to do that. But we would include in that tips and advice, and then we did not all come to one or two statewide meetings or half-state meetings, but we would organize clinics in clusters around the state, 5 or 8. We'd call the scheduling was a little more simple back then. They didn't have all the state tests and all that stuff, so it was pretty easy to schedule clinics. And a couple of professors, Tommy Miller, Dr. Husney, Dr. Norton, we'd leave Oxford early in the morning and drive to Tylertown or Macomb or Greenville and have 8 or 10 high schools from that area come there for a day of talking about high school journalism and tips and tricks. But it was a simpler time, and I think the school or the department then got its first computer, and Will Norton would only let the school secretary use it. Nobody else could touch it, and how fancy it was that we were able to make a master list of addresses and print out address labels for those. we were pretty high tech.
Robin?
Okay. First, I'm just curious because I know at least one person in the room was a high school journalist. If you were involved in journalism in high school, just stand up. Come on. Yay. That's the one I knew.
Absolutely.
Yay, yay, yay. Okay. Was anyone editor of your paper? Oh, didn't want to stand up for that. Okay. When I was running MSPA, we would have these workshops in Jackson and Tupelo every time because there's 2 large newspapers that would sponsor them. In Tupelo, what's there? Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal. And in Jackson, Mr. Overby, what's there in Jackson? There is the Clarion Ledger. We have a former editor of the Clarion Ledger there. And so I'd be looking out in this sea of, 200 high school students, all of whom were really not excited about being there. And so I would say, well, stand up if you're from Tupelo. Stand up if you're from Clarksdale. And then, boy, it really embarrasses me now. But then my next question would be, well, stand up if you kiss on the first date. And they would stand up. And they seemed to think that was really funny at the time. Now, that doesn't go over so well. So I'm not going to ask y'all to stand up if you kiss on the first date. It seemed to be funny 15 years ago, right? But how I came to be director was I got a panicked phone call from the acting chair of the then Department of Journalism, Dr. Samir Husney, because this wonderful gentleman sitting right there, Dr. Will Norton, who's trying to look inconspicuous, had just left as chair of the then Department of Journalism. Dr. Husney came in, and there was no one directing MSPA. And I had a dual background in journalism, and what a lot of people don't know about me, you may not even know this, Charlie Mitchell, I worked as an admissions counselor for Ole Miss and had traveled in and out of all these high schools in Mississippi. So Dr. Husney called and said, I can't do a Dr. Husney imitation. Can you do a Dr. Husney imitation?
Nobody can.
No, okay. He said, can you do it? And I said, yes. So the next day I became the director, and it was a wonderful experience.
That's awesome. Beth?
How did I get involved in journalism? I was at my high school yearbook, and that was part of it, but that didn't cinch it completely for me. I actually had a degree in English, and so I came teaching English and moved to Oxford doing that, and so I enjoyed doing that some. But the interesting thing is I walked into the principal's office just before school started. I was hired a week ahead of time. And so I said, okay, well, I have my assignments. I have English 1, English 4, English blah, blah, blah. And thank you so much. And I had my hand on the doorknob. And he said, oh, wait, I forgot to tell you, you have to teach a journalism class. And I said, I've only had 3 hours of journalism. I'm sure there's somebody more qualified. And he said, you have 3 more than anybody else. And so he said, but all you have to do is be certified in journalism. And so at that time, the state was kind of like this on certification. And so they said, well, all you got to do is have 12 hours. You have 3. So, okay. So I went back to Ole Miss, called Will Norton, said, help me, help me. And so we got all signed up to be able to do that, and I took that, and so I went into school the next year, and he said, Miss Fitz, he said, I just got a letter from the State Department, you have to have 18 hours now. Okay, so I went back and I took 18 hours. Went back the next year, the principal said, Miss Fitz, I really hate to tell you this, but the State Department has changed that certification requirement again. You have to have 32 hours to be certified to teach journalism. So by this time, here's the thing that God did for me. I, by this time, loved journalism. It was the joy of my life. And so I decided, well, let me just go ahead and get another master's at this point. But I did write the guy in Jackson, and I said, this is really not a fun game for you to change this on me. Could you please send me in writing so I can put it in a locked vault, what I'm going to have to do to be certified in journalism? But what happened from there is it became my passion, and I loved it with everything. I loved everything you taught, but I knew nothing when I first started. I remember coming to Robin's MSPA. We won nothing, no award of any kind. And I said, this is not going to work. What are we going to do? So we started going to conventions more, being involved more, reading more, taking classes helped me so much.
But you said you won nothing?
Won nothing.
Okay, I thought you said you learned nothing.
No, won no awards.
All right. But then you won everything there was.
Well, no, well, it took a long time. But the point is, it's like being involved and searching where I could learn more, whether it's going to conferences like you all do or learning from my students as we practice things. I had the best students in the whole world. They didn't have to take, or Jay can say this, they didn't have to take journalism in high school. They wanted to, and they were dedicated, and it was so fun to learn together. And so from that, I kept being involved with MSP. I remember almost every convention you did, Robin. And then
Wait, did you kiss on the first date?
I didn't answer that question. So, but anyway, it was so fun. And then one day, Samir, Will was gone. But let me tell you, during this time, our paper changed a lot. And every year, I would send Will Norton a copy of the paper. And I would say, we've done this differently, Will. And he would always write me a note back. You're doing a good job. I'm proud of you. And it's amazing how just a little bit of encouragement keeps you going. So anyway, then Samir called me, and he was acting chair at the time, and said, I just wanted you to come back and be the director of MSPA. And at that time, I couldn't because I was still teaching. I hadn't retired. And so I said, I will do everything for the convention, but I can't do the judging because we're in it. And so then the next year I retired. And so I got to be, because that was such a privilege, because to be able to see high school students get better. I mean, the workshops in the summer, Bernice Morris, remember Bernice? Bernice had a summer workshop going on, and we would invite kids to come in. And people like Bill Rose would be the writing instructor. How can you sit under Bill Rose for a week and not be transformed as a writer? And so we started seeing people all over the state begin to grow, and it was the biggest privilege ever. But God backed me into it, kind of, with the 12 hours, 18 hours.
Never.
It was the best thing ever.
We're never searching for it.
No,
but
but
once
it was
you found
great.
it, then it was great.
It was great.
Well, just for people out there to understand MSPA, not just high school journalism, but specifically the Mississippi Scholastic Press Association, was founded at the University of Mississippi in 1947. The Department of Journalism here at the University of Mississippi was also founded in 1947. And so just to give you a little bit of an idea of how critical of how mission critical MSPA is to the work of the school here, I want to read you just a brief passage out of Dr. Ronald Flair's book on the history of the School of Journalism here at Ole Miss. He recently passed, but he wrote this just a few years ago, and there's a chapter in here on MSPA, and it says, even before he arrived at the University of Mississippi to create and launch that institution's journalism department, Dr. Gerald Forbes knew that he would need to recruit students, good students, into the program. A most effective way to do that was to make sure kids in high school knew that journalism was an attractive career field and that Ole Miss would be a good place to prepare for it. He had told the chancellor as much when he was being interviewed for the chairmanship. When asked what he hoped to accomplish should he be offered the chance to lead the new department, Forbes made out a list of his priorities, and the first item on it was to create some kind of program for high school boys and girls who worked on their school newspapers. Frankly, he would later write, I wanted to get some of the brightest students thinking about Ole Miss and visiting it. The brightest students in high school generally included those who put out the school paper, and that worked well for me. So I wanted to ask you guys, in your experience with MSPA, did you find that statement to be true? Talk a little bit about the quality of students that you saw come through MSPA when you were in charge of high school journalism, and where those students kind of fit into the ecosystem of a school that's open to any and everybody.
Well, absolutely. I would think. I was thinking about this evening. I wasn't the editor of my high school newspaper, but there were co-editors, and one is a practicing physician. She's a pathologist in South Mississippi, and the other just retired from as head of the Department of Philosophy and Religion at Millsaps College. So when I was in law school, we had a professor who used to assign readings and the required readings, and then he would give you what he called a off-the-menu special. And to me, that's what high school journalism is. It's a way for your forward-looking students, your best students, to get involved in the life of their school and to pick up lifelong skills that they may or may not use in journalism, but they learn to, as you were just describing, RJ, organize their thoughts, communicate with people, write clearly and concisely. Mm-hmm. And as time goes on and there's less and less emphasis in K-12 on essays and those types of things that only English teachers read, that's a crucial thing. I think having high school media programs now is more important than it's ever been, because even though it's not on the menu of every school, it's something that can be added that is really an enrichment and a lifelong prep for the kind of things that you'll do, whether you're a physician or whether you're a professor of philosophy or whatever it is you do in life. The core skills that you learn in high school journalism apply to your life and everything you do.
Absolutely.
I have a good example of that. Like I said, I had tremendously brilliant and dedicated students. But I remember I got a letter from one who was at West Point. And so in the letter he said, "Dear Miss Fitz, I just wanted to write and tell you thank you." He said, because he was really brilliant, like most of my kids were anyway, but he said, "I took every AP, every college credit course in high school I could take." But he said, "Here, nothing has made more difference than journalism." He said, "I know how to talk to people. I know how to get down to what's the nitty gritty when I'm talking to people. I know how to read large amounts of material and condense it into something that's easily readable." He said, "I know how to meet deadlines." He said, "The people here that are plebes with me, they're dying at West Point. I just set a deadline. I know where to get to it." He said, "I know how to formulate my ideas. I know how to write well. I know how to make people read what I write." He said, "It's a communication that has helped me more than anything else." And I think by far that's what journalism kids are, whether they're in high school or college or professionals. It's that somehow your brain is organized that way when you're taught those kind of skills that we don't have anywhere else. And I'm kind of like you, Charlie. I kind of hate that we're not working as much on writing in schools as much nowadays.
They're really life skills.
They are life skills. And he said, there's so many people who just don't understand how valuable journalism is. And we were just privileged enough to be able to have people all over the state come in just like that. You brought some people all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Remember the redheaded guy?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, really good.
Robin, do you
I
have
was
any?
just going to say from personal experience, I actually came to journalism a little bit later in my life because I wanted to go into public relations. And I keep bringing up Dr. Norton, who's sitting there saying, "Quit pointing at me, Robin." But I came to see him and I said, "I want to be in public relations." And he said, "Well, then you have to get an undergraduate degree in journalism." And I'd already graduated from college in a whole different degree program. And I was like, no, journalists, they have to talk to people, and I'm not good at that. And he didn't seem to care. He just said, "No, you have to do that." And then years later went back. Did y'all take this admissions test when you started college that said what your strengths might be and your capabilities? This was like 15, 20 years ago. I went back and I found my college test, and it said, "You should be a journalist." And I got very teary-eyed, because I remember seeing that as a freshman and saying, "I can't do that. I can't talk to people. I can't talk to people. I just can't be a journalist." And so 20 years later, this man said, "No, you have to." And so I just fell in love with journalism because, as you all keep saying, you gather information, you put it together in a way that other people can easily read it or view it or hear it and comprehend it. And yes, you learn so much to be organized. You learn how to tell people here's what matters and why it matters, and you learn to meet deadlines. So even though my career was in public relations, I also was a practicing journalist. For 20 years, I wrote about health and fitness topics. And it taught me so much about all those skills you've been discussing. So I think journalism, many people are kind of scared of it. But once you get into it, it helps you learn so much. And I was just curious how many students out here are actually journalism majors. One. All right. Two. Yay. Three. How many IMC majors?
Coming out of the woodwork.
Yeah. Well, IMC is a fantastic program, but I know you get a little training in journalism. IMC, help me, Charlie, the writing course, 205, I think.
Is, yeah,
You
that's
get a little
right.
bit of experience in what it's like to be a journalist and to have to go gather facts and ask people questions. And you're probably all, how many of you had IMC 205? And you don't have to say so, but I guess you were probably like rolling your eyes, like, why do I have to learn to write like this? But I've had so many IMC students tell me later, yes, that really helped me be a better writer because you learn how to write to be read or to be heard. Where when you're writing in English class, as Miss Viz once taught, you're not necessarily writing for other people other than your teacher to read. So it's such a helpful skill. I kind of got way off on a tangent
but
here.
it's just a different way of thinking about the world and a different way of thinking about writing. You know, a normal person tells a story once upon a time and then they all lived happily ever after. We learn to tell stories starting with the happily ever after.
Exactly.
You know, and so you flip everything upside down, and so you know how to communicate directly and how to get to the point instead of dawdling around for 300 or 400 words.
You know, we're talking about the importance of MSPA to others, and I think that's a huge thing, RJ, because it's suddenly they could see what was a value that somebody else had won an award for, and maybe at some points we started to publish those things so they could see how to write better, and they'd come to conventions or come to summer workshops or away workshops like Charlie was talking about, and Robin, where you go to Tupelo or Jackson or down South Mississippi, which we've done. And somehow it inspires you to get better. You know, when you see what other people are doing and you think, I can do that. I just hadn't thought of that before. And so the more you get people from all over communing together, I think it gives you energy to want to get better.
Yeah,
I think we did that.
In prep for tonight, and we have very few archives over the years. Things are lost and misplaced, and during some people's tenure, like the three of you, there's copious notes and records, and then in other eras, there's not much there. But I was able to dig out the 1947 program, which was the original. At that time, it was called the Mississippi Press Institute. In the 50s, it changed names and became the Mississippi Scholastic Press Association. But the very first Mississippi Press Institute was May 9th and 10th, 1947. They started on a Friday, had a full day of sessions and speakers, and then they had group photos, and then they had a banquet. J.O. Emmerich, publisher in Macomb, was the keynote. And then at 8:30, they had a barn dance for all of the high school students. And then they finished up the next day with sessions in the morning and then a luncheon. But it included a roster of schools that attended, and there were, I believe, it's written here, 9 high schools, 12 high schools. Clarksdale, Hattiesburg, Greenville, Yazoo City, Starkville, Treadwell High School of Memphis, Drew, Kosciuszko, Belzoni, Leland, Houston, Central High School of Jackson, Picayune, Lee High School of Columbus, Charleston, Indianola, and Natchez. There were also a few colleges. Of those original MSPA attendees, only Starkville is still a member. But I wanted to ask you guys, first of all, what's your favorite barn dance?
A dozy-do kind of guy.
I knew you were.
Yeah.
You've mentioned that a few times through the years.
I wanted to say something about IMC and journalism.
Yeah.
They're a lot closer than people think. I think that the skill set of a journalist and the skill set of a person in marketing is that you have an issue and you do copious amounts of research into that issue, and you decide what's important and relevant, and then you craft a message to deliver it to an audience. And that's what IMC does. That's what journalism does. The difference in IMC is that you also measure the results. The journalists, the outcome is whether you keep your job or not.
Yeah.
But that's they're not night and day.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I wanted to say is that a lot of people, I think, are naturally curious, and they go through their whole lives wondering about things. And the joy of journalists is that you get to ask questions. You kind of have a license to ask questions that are none of your business, really. And other people just have to wonder about this, and you can just go ask somebody with your journalist hat on, a question that other people just get to wonder about.
Well, and once you've done it a few times, you realize that the worst thing they're going to say is, "Well, go to hell."
Oh, yeah.
And once you've been
Well,
told to go to hell a few
things than that.
times, then you're not that worried about it. And so then you have freedom to ask anybody anything. And I find myself in different situations that I'm usually not afraid to ask a question or clarify because I'm not scared of what they're going to say. But what I was going to ask about is events. We've started in 1947, and you've kind of hinted at it a couple of times through here. But talk about events, the kind of events that you would host for students during your era, and what those looked like, and who you had to speak, that kind of thing.
Well, we had a great professor here. He's deceased now, named Tommy Miller. And Tommy Miller could hold an audience spellbound, kind of like Bill Rose does. Tommy really looked like he was built for basketball, and he would enter the back of the auditorium dribbling a basketball. Then he'd dribble the basketball down and put it on the lectern, and he'd leave it there during his entire presentation. And then when he was through, he would pick up the basketball and dribble it out. And the thing was that high school kids, who were like you, thinking about girls and boys, they spent their whole time paying attention, knowing he was going to do something else with that basketball.
Yeah.
But he never did. But he was really good. Just out of curiosity, I was on doing an MSPA presentation long after I was at the university, and Dr. Husney had the same ability. And everybody knows the person that we're not supposed to talk about, Will Norton. He was great. So, and we had Virginia Brody, and we had other people that were just really understood what high school scholastic journalism was about, and the nuts and bolts and the beauties of it, and they were always upbeat and encouraging. And so we had fun on those trips.
Yeah.
So we were having fun too. It wasn't work.
Yeah.
It was a day trip out of Oxford for us to go to some town and meet people and visit with students.
And so you never did big conventions.
No.
You did regional workshops.
We did regional workshops, and
How many?
We do either, I can't remember whether it was 5 or 8 that we would do, and the students at Ole Miss loved it because all the professors had to cancel their classes that day to go on the road trip. And I don't think we ever went anywhere where we stayed overnight. We didn't have any kind of budget for that. But Chrysler had first come out with their Dodge minivans and Chrysler minivans. And in those days, the university had a motor pool, and you could reserve a vehicle. And they kept them real clean and everything. Where they're building the STEM building now is where the motor pool was, and you could go reserve a vehicle. And you felt like you were special when you pulled up in front of a high school with the University of Mississippi emblem on the side of a brand new Dodge soccer minivan, mama van, soccer mom van. Just didn't let Will Norton drive, and you were all right.
How about you, Robin?
I mentioned the workshops we did in Tupelo and Jackson. That's kind of the formula I ended up doing the most, because in Jackson you could get the more southern Mississippi, and the Clarion Ledger would co-sponsor it with us. And then the speakers would all be the Clarion Ledger reporters, editors, photographers, and, some journalists are great speakers and some are not great speakers.
Yeah.
Some of us are better writers than speakers. But for the students to hear from someone who really does what they do, I think really made an impression. And then in Tupelo, the Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal staff members would be at the workshop. And then we would have the annual conference, which I think you all have continued to do, where you had the competitions, everyone around the state could enter. And then you would run all through the journalism building begging people to judge the categories, right?
Yeah.
Probably begged you a time or two. And
A time or 30.
yeah. And then at the convention, you'd bring in speakers from pretty much anywhere, not
Yeah.
necessarily Mississippi, and then have the awards ceremony, which I think you're going to have tomorrow.
Yep. How about you, Beth?
You know what? That's all kind of a blur.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think because we did some in South Mississippi. I know we did all the way on the coast one time, and then we did Meridian one time, and we started adding those because then gas was really high and they couldn't come like they could come to Jackson before. So we just went to them, but we still did exactly what y'all were doing to try to go to them. And then we also tried to get, because this world is a journalism. The mind of a journalist goes further than just Mississippi. And so we thought it was pretty important to get involved with Journalism Education Association, Southern Scholastic Press Association, and to take kids there to let them see what the bigger world of journalism was. And of course, you get some really good speakers in that too.
Absolutely.
And so, and I think you started taking buses, I think, RJ.
We've taken buses to
do that.
SIPA in Columbia, South Carolina. And with Oxford being so far north in the state, and this being our headquarters, it is a challenge to engage schools south of Jackson in particular. And so you try to do some regional workshops, and I know you used to do one on the coast or try to get something in Jackson. I know, Robin, you did one in Jackson, so you could use. Now, we ended up about 5 or 6 years ago adding we partner with Southern Miss, and we do a fall full-scale statewide convention there on their campus now, so that the idea being that schools, whether you're in the north end of the state or the southern end of the state, we're going to have one convention a year, one statewide convention a year that is within a day's drive, and one you probably would have to stay overnight for. And so a lot of people will come to both, and some schools will only come to the one that's closest to them. But it's been a challenge, and I know you guys know this, to engage the southern part of the state in programming.
But it's important to make them feel so important too. It's a part of
Absolutely.
it. But another thing that being involved in the bigger press association thing is that sometimes that led us to get speakers from far away to come in, because I tell you what, Ole Miss was invaluable, as was the Clarion Ledger, as was Tupelo, as the paper down on the coast, Sun Herald. They were so good to always offer their speakers and to help with support and to sponsor the dinners, as y'all know, so much financial support. But it was also good for the kids to see people who were big names in the nation too, because that really helped. I remember one time I was in New York City, and a friend of mine and I had been invited to come to a little, I guess it was a dinner, in somebody's apartment on the Hudson River, and I was walking through the room, and Bobby Hawthorne stopped me. Now, y'all probably don't know Bobby Hawthorne, but he was like the keynote speaker of America. I mean, like, he spoke to 10,000 people and didn't blink an eye. And he stopped me and he said, Beth, he said, I would like to come and be your keynote speaker at MSPA. And I said, excuse me? I said, Bobby, we don't have the money to pay you what you make. He said, oh, no, it doesn't matter. He said, I've just heard so many good things about Ole Miss and Oxford and the caliber of kids you have there. You just pay me whatever you want to. I'll teach college classes. I'll teach classes. I'll be your keynote. I'll run errands for you, whatever you want me to do if you'll let me come. And I just wanted to tell you that because he was phenomenal. But he came because we were phenomenal. You get the connection? And it was like he knew what caliber of kids we had here. He wouldn't have volunteered otherwise. And I think those kind of connections are important to get people to do that. And the guy who is the charge of NSPA came one time to do that too. And I actually took them to Ajax to eat, and then to Logan, and I took them to Taylor Grocery. And in the midst of the meal at Taylor Grocery, I'm thinking, oh my word, I've taken them to the two worst looking places. I mean, you think the stereotype of Mississippi, Taylor Grocery with the floors, and I said, y'all, I'm so sorry. We have nice places in Oxford too. And they said, no, we get taken to nice places all the time. this is phenomenal. They were taking pictures, they were writing their names on the tablecloths. So anyway, just a trivia, but I just wanted to say that people think highly of what you have done in Mississippi, and I think that's a compliment.
The school, the organization, MSPA, has been thoroughly blessed by having its home at the University of Mississippi. And as the school as the journalism program grew from a department into a school, and then we added the IMC program, which many of you are a part of, then that has only benefited Scholastic more because we have more resources on hand, we have more ability to do sessions, we have more people to judge or to do this, that, and the other. But the most critical people in high school journalism are the teachers that are in the classroom day in and day out, that are teaching and molding young people.
And there's two of them right here that we should acknowledge, two wonderful high school journalism teachers.
Well, and so I would like to ask the three of you, just about your interactions with advisors and what you saw from classroom teachers, and if that has changed over the years or anything like that.
What Beth experienced, the fact that she had a CV with a 3-hour credit in journalism certified her, as far as the principal was concerned, to head it up. I had a daughter who was a lifeguard, and so when she got her first job in teaching in public school, they said, "Oh, you're a lifeguard. You can coach the swim team." She'd never been to a swim meet,
Exactly.
But it is something that a lot of the advisors get pulled into, and some warm to it, and thank goodness they do. And the others you need to kind of nurture along and not let them continue to think that it's a burden or an extra work or, in a lot of states when somebody takes on something other than if they're hired as an English teacher and if they take on cheerleader sponsor or something like that, they get extra pay for it. Well, Mississippi doesn't do that.
Not often.
And so not as a rule. And so they do need a lot of support, and you want to make sure that they know that you're going to do anything you can for them. And then in terms of a lot of times the local papers are really good if they need equipment. Newspaper used to change computers pretty regularly, and they would contact us and say, can the high school use this equipment? And so you have that, you build those kinds of networks. And a lot of times at conventions, what I would see was we would you have provided for time for advisors to have their own sessions. And they, exactly like y'all are talking about, feed off each other. And the people who've been doing it for 20 years talk to the people who just got told that this is their job.
Yeah.
and so they can get a support system established. That's how it works in a lot of professions, and it certainly works that way. I've seen it work that way for people who are advisors.
Right.
Is to know that they have a resource, and this is that they shouldn't feel incredibly put upon that they get to do this. And a lot of principals have different attitudes about it, and I'm sure y'all encountered a lot of that.
Of course.
You're very fortunate when you can find a principal who is not so stressed by all the other things that are going on that will entertain the idea of an off-the-menu special. And so you try to convince them of the things that we've all been talking about earlier, that this is not about having some piece of printed paper or a website that has the picture of the prom queen on it that costs money and might cause a problem, but it's really life skills.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes an uphill fight, and I congratulate you for your effectiveness in fighting that fight because you've been good at it.
It's something, I tell you. Robin?
I kind of want to not answer your question.
Okay.
Which a journalist hates when someone
Yeah,
does not
I'll just
answer
ask
your
it again.
question. Okay. All right. Something I've been thinking a lot about recently is current events. So, y'all ready for a current events quiz? They all looked up like, huh, what country's being invaded right now? And who's doing the invading? And how are the journalists doing in Russia? Who's telling the journalists what to say? Putin.
Yeah.
And if you've never stopped to think about why we have the First Amendment, why we have journalism in this country and freedom of the press, stop for just a second. You don't have to think more than 30 seconds about that.
Oh, they're in my class. They have to think about it a lot more than 30 seconds.
Okay. That we do live in a country where we may like what the reporters tell us, and we may go crazy trying to listen to the different broadcast news people talk about different topics, but we have the right to do that, and we have the right to go ask the president questions and go ask the governor questions. And they don't have that right in Russia. And just keep that in mind. The next time you take journalism for granted, don't. It is, I almost said something else. It is a big deal. And you can imagine what word I was thinking of putting in the middle there. Yes. So.
Well, and that kind of I was going to get into that point too, because high school journalism serves so many different functions. There's the function at the individual level of the soft skills and the life skills that we've talked about. Then there's the macro level of maybe they end up, the technical or professional level. Maybe they end up going into journalism or becoming an IMC practitioner or broadcaster or newspaper reporter or anything like that. But there's also this civic realm to high school journalism. And so could you guys talk just a little bit about, the importance of the role of high school journalism in democracy and the way that the Scholastic Press Association enables that? Anybody?
I think I'm not qualified, but I know someone who is.
I may, Charlie.
Well, it's pretty, journalists like to put things in short frame. You either have freedom of expression or you don't have democracy. It's just one of the, you can't say that you're a free people if you don't have freedom of expression, and that includes freedom of press. I mean, you're just, I don't know who you're kidding if you say that. And instilling those values is important. The Freedom Forum does annual First Amendment audits. We had a guest speaker here last night who graduated in '86, and the first thing she said when she came in this room was, "I sure am glad to see that."
Absolutely.
That's neat. I want to talk about just for a second. You're talking about democracy and people out there, but
Yeah.
I think that high school journalism is important for the community of the school itself.
Absolutely.
It kind of gives value and worth to truth and wanting to find out more. I can remember when I first started teaching, they always just sold the paper for like 25 cents at the first of the school day or at the end of the school day. And we started passing it out free at lunch. This is after we finally learned how to write. But it was so good for my kids to pass them out. And then they were in cafeteria, and they would see every person at every table almost with that paper up as they were eating. And to me, that validated what they were doing. And that creates the bigger picture of what's important to
Makes
all
you
kids.
want to do more.
Yeah.
Makes you want to do more.
Yeah, that's probably off topic a little, sorry.
Well, now, when you were director, were most of the members of MSPA newspapers or other?
Probably, probably thinking your book might have edged out for the first part, but as we got into it, your newspapers probably took over.
How
And
about
a little
you,
bit of
Robin or
magazine.
Charlie? Mostly school newspapers, or other types of student media?
I don't remember doing a count. I do remember that for our annual contest, the deadline was like a Wednesday, and Tuesday morning I went into what's his name's office, and I said, I've sent out everything I've sent out the rules. I've done everything I know to do. We've got one yearbook. He said, don't worry. And the next morning, I found out that deadlines is when you turn something in.
Right, right.
And we had probably 90 yearbooks and 80 newspaper show up. The campus post actually had to make several trips to bring the contest entries in. But yeah, it was that was probably the most scared I ever was
Yeah.
that we had done all this work to prepare all this information to get everybody ready to judge contests, and I had one entry the day before the deadline.
It's still like that every single year, both on contest deadline and registering for convention. It's, it can sit around on deadline day, the day before deadline, and we'll have 200 students signed up, and then by the close of the next day, it's 450 or 500, And I'm sitting there thinking, well, why do I need all these sessions for? Then nobody's going to be at this thing. And then, boom, there they are,
Oh, then you have a tornado coming, and then
Well,
you
yeah,
don't.
and then so tomorrow was supposed to be our 75th anniversary convention, our spring convention, and we've got Charles Overby and Andrea, who's going to be our keynotes. But there's a giant storm coming through tomorrow afternoon, and so when I got up this morning, we had about 25 schools that were signed up and 400 students. By 2:30 this afternoon, we were down to about 170 because it was schools that were their superintendent and principal were telling them that they couldn't go, they couldn't travel, and that's the safest thing. And so late this afternoon, made the unfortunate decision to have to cancel tomorrow's convention that we've all worked so hard to put together. And so sometimes that happens, it's just one of those things.
But we know how much work that goes
It's a
into
lot
that.
of work.
So that's
It's
hard decision.
a lot of work. Well, at this point, before we get too far out of time, we want to open it up for questions from the audience. So if you've got a question for any member of our panel, please raise your hand. And we've got two microphones here, so wait and let somebody come up to you so that we can get you on the audio. Any questions for this panel?
So you stated that, journalism is all about, the freedom of speech. We don't necessarily see that in Russia right now with Putin under control. Recently I was watching 60 Minutes, and I couldn't help but notice that it feels like modern journalism has moved away from honing in on the questions that they're asking and really making sure that who they're interviewing answers the question. And it seems like they're just satisfied now with just the answer they give. Is there like a reason why that is, or how do you feel about that, respecting journalism like you do?
Well, first, who was the reporter?
Anderson Cooper.
It wasn't Sharon Alfonsi, was it?
No, sir.
Well, she's a much better reporter than Anderson Cooper because Sharon Alfonsi is an Ole Miss graduate. She was from Fayetteville, Arkansas, and she has done a fantastic job as a 60 Minutes correspondent. But to answer your question, there are some people who are very practiced at not answering questions, and so it kind of cuts both ways. Is that you really have to articulate a very good question and be persistent. And sometimes, though, you just realize the specific answer that you're trying to get is either something that's unknowable or the person doesn't know how to answer it. If you ask a question of somebody like what Anderson Cooper has, somebody a question like, how's this going to end in Ukraine? Well, how would you answer that if you were, you don't know. So it's really, there's some questions that are really easy to answer and some you just have to put a more contextual answer to. But I think that a good journalist will stick with the question until, as long as he possibly can to get a satisfactory answer.
But kind of to your point, one of the issues that we run into is if you've got a politician who is extremely skilled and well versed and well practiced at not answering a question, then it's critical for us as journalists to be equally as practiced at re-asking and asking and being persistent and getting those questions. Well, you don't get to learn those skills unless you go through a lot of reps and you get a lot of experience. And as news business has kind of changed over the years, we have fewer super experienced journalists, and sometimes people being thrown into situations that they're not developed for. And if we had more maybe high school journalism education and people getting an earlier start and getting some reps, I can tell you that just walking into a classroom in college, and most of you are in my 101 freshman class, particularly when you get into journalism 102 or IMC 205, your first writing classes, it becomes very obvious who had a high school journalism background and who did not. Not that that's not overcomable, but it becomes obvious where the gaps are. People who had a high school journalism background, whether it's broadcast, which we have a ton of now, and that's changed, and now we have a ton of high school student media podcasts. And so it's a very diverse cornucopia of student media items that we have now. But people who are versed in telling a story and have been telling a story for a few years are much better at getting to the point and getting to the heart of an issue than people who are just trying to figure it out right then. That's a great question.
Great question.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So I know most of the newspapers and broadcasts, they're more, or you would think that their advisor is the one that leads them, but how important do you think that student-run and student-led organizations are, and what makes a good student leader?
Wow.
It's a great question.
Y'all worked with students.
Yeah, I'm going to yield to you.
Beth's
What
probably the most
makes
qualified.
I don't know, but what makes a good student leader? Part of it's intelligence, but that's not all of it. It is learning the word we. It's like, we will work together to get this deadline. We will make the best issue of this paper or this magazine that's ever been published here. I remember we had all the people in the school who have power, the coaches, the principals, the superintendents, whatever, come in after school one day, and the editor got up and he said, you know, you are the people who don't like us to come because you're scared of what we're going to write. But he said, I'm going to pledge to you from this whole staff that we are going to have the best newspaper that's ever been published in this entire school. And interesting enough, there was a little assistant principal who had just said, I just want you to know that if you ever interview me, you have to let me read what you're going to say. Well, after the editor said what I just told you, the superintendent stood up and he said, son, he said, I know that one day you're going to come to my office and I'm not going to like what you write because I'm going to have to tell you something that I don't necessarily like. But he said, so long as you do what you told me and you're going to research and you're going to check both sides and you're going to make sure it's fair and impartial, I support anything you write in this paper. And son, you never have to come and let me proof it first. So see, to me, it's like somebody who has enough integrity, enough pushing, enough people knowing that they believe in the truth of what they say and the right of other people to know it. That's what makes a good leader. And I was so privileged to have that kind of people all the way up. But it just, and I think it's important for advisors to learn to step back. You know, we don't have freedom of the press in high school in Mississippi, but we have to learn to step back a little bit to say, do you think you can support this? You know, I remember a guy that was going to write his editorial, his sports editorial, over why cheerleading was not a sport. And I said, okay, his girlfriend was a cheerleader. And I said, you know that as soon as this publishes, they're going to be at the door and it's going to be bad. And he said, I got it. I've done all my research. I know exactly what I'm writing. I've done all the background on both sides of this issue. I got it. And it's an editorial. Can I write it? And sure enough, they came, but he believed in what he said, whether it was good or bad. If you're a cheerleader, sorry. But he believed in what he said, and he researched it. He didn't just put out his opinion. He went and researched. He talked to people. He talked to both sides. He made sure it was right. That's what makes a good leader, and that's what we need more and more of today. So y'all keep doing that. Do that.
I'll go you one better. The way I used to explain it, the best high school football coach in America never plays a down. It's the athletes on the field that play. All we're there to do is coach. We try to give you a good game plan. We try to help you learn some skills. We put you through some drills. We try to help you develop some pride in yourself, in your publication. But at the end of the day, it's you and your team that will succeed or fail in delivering the news to your student body, and ultimately, on from there. And so there is nothing more critical than student leadership. Absolutely.
What you're talking about is integrity. And so that's what you look for, is a person with integrity. I started teaching the ethics course, and this first day I point out that this is not a course where you start out as an unethical person and you leave as an ethical person. This is, you are who you are. We can talk to you about some do's and don'ts, some formulas and stuff like that. But your personal values, your personal integrity is something you establish for yourself, and others around you will recognize it. And one of the most important things in journalism is even though I teach the law, is not the law. It's the building of a trust relationship, as you described.
That's right.
Whereas you know that the person may have to write something you don't agree with, may write something that flatters you too much, may write something that flatters you just right. But they did it with integrity. And you form those trust relationships, which again, forming a trust relationship is a life skill. And then everything else tends to kind of fall in place once you get those basics done.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Well, we'd like to thank you so much for attending, and thank you to all of our panelists. And we hope that you will join us outside for a generous reception, and we're dismissed. Thank you.